The cumin seeds that I'm grinding here are essential for my recipe that I'm cooking today. Capouns in Councy, or in my adaptation, chicken with quinces. The ground cumin seeds are first used in making a rub for the chicken. I have here a large organic chicken weighing in at 1.9 kilograms, just over 4 pounds. For the rub I combine 1 teaspoon of olive oil, half a teaspoon of ground cumin, a quarter of a teaspoon of powder fort, and a quarter teaspoon of sea salt. You'll need to make your own powder fort as you won't find it on the supermarket shelves. I made some earlier. I make it in small batches, grinding up 15 grams, half an ounce, of black peppercorns, the same amount of long pepper, half a teaspoon of whole cloves, and 1/4 teaspoon of grated nutmeg. After blending the spices to make the rub, I work it into the chicken skin. The chicken will cook at 160 degrees in a fan oven, otherwise 180 degrees or 350 degrees Fahrenheit. I half cook the chicken for 40 minutes. In Form of Curry, Richard II's cookery book, dating to about 1390, it says to roast the capons at the right heat so that they're not quite half done. Roasting here may well refer to spit roasting. However, in the contemporaneous Liber Utilis Coquinario, the book of useful cookery, it says to roast either capons or chickens on a gredile, a griddle. The griddle here most probably refers to a metal grate that was placed over the kitchen fire. Now I could barbecue my chicken to achieve a similar effect, but it's midwinter outside, and so the oven is my friend. Once the par-cooked chicken is cool enough to handle, I set about jointing it. Ideally I'd use a large non-slip cutting board, one with a gully for collecting juices, but that's on order right now. So instead I'm jointing the chicken inside the roasting tin, steadied by a tea towel underneath it. I cut the legs off, then remove the breasts from the bone, and then cut the wing joints, a little ungainly. I put the carcass into a large pan. The legs are further jointed into thighs and drumsticks. And the breasts are cut into halves. I reserve these on a separate plate because they take less time to finish cooking than the other pieces. And what happens next is, to me, the most important part of the dish, the broth. I add to my chicken carcass 1 carrot cut up into chunks, 1 onion peeled and quartered, half a teaspoon of whole cumin seeds, a quarter of a teaspoon of crushed black peppercorns, and just a pinch of salt. You don't need to add any more salt at this stage of the recipe. I pour over enough hot water to almost cover the carcass. I don't fully cover it because as the broth cooks I turn and press the carcass into the liquid to make sure I get all the lovely chickeny goodness into it. And because later this broth will need to be reduced, it's just quicker in the reduction process if I don't have too much water to start off with. The broth is steadily boiled for about 25 minutes. By this stage, the liquid will have absorbed all the flavours from the carcass and vegetables. Next, I remove the carcass and vegetables with a slotted spoon, and then strain the broth through a sieve into a large bowl. This is then returned back to the pan, making sure there is no debris still in there. Then I boil the broth vigorously in order to reduce its volume. I'm looking in the end to have half a litre, about 1 pint. It's really important to have a good chicken flavour in the broth, as this is the basis of the sauce that the chicken sits in. You only get the required intensity by reducing it. Whilst it's reducing, I get on with grinding up another spice mix which will be added to the broth. I grind 1/4 teaspoon of sea salt with a pinch of saffron, 1/4 teaspoon of my previously ground cumin, and 1/4 teaspoon of my ready-made powder fort. I add this to my reduced broth and give it a good stir before tasting it. There's the warmth from the powder fort, and the earthy tones of the cumin meld beautifully with the saffron. I then pour the spice broth over my chicken pieces, though I reserve the chicken breasts for now. This goes into the oven at the same temperature as before, that's 160 fan or 180 Celsius 350 Fahrenheit for non-fan users. After 10 minutes, I add the breast pieces. This is then cooked for a further 20 minutes or until tender and cooked through. Whilst the chicken finishes cooking, I boil 5 large eggs. Now I don't want to overboil my eggs. I place room temperature eggs into cold water, bring to the boil, and then steadily boil them for 6 minutes. As soon as they're done, I drain away the boiling water and replace with cold water in order to inhibit further cooking. The yolks will be just right. Once I've peeled my eggs, I cut lengthways around the white of each one, making sure not to cut too deeply. I then carefully tease away the white to reveal my yolk. Or, in this case, a double yolk. The egg whites are then chopped finely. These will be going into the sauce. To make the quinces, you've all been wondering when they would turn up. I stud my lovely yellow ovals each end with cloves. Ta-da! I have quinces! Now it's time to thicken my sauce. Once the chicken has finished its final cooking, I turn the oven off Transfer the chicken pieces into a warmed serving dish and then return this to the oven to rest until the sauce is finished. To thicken it, I transfer the sauce into a saucepan. Add 50 grams, a little less than half a US cup, of white breadcrumbs, and over a medium heat, dissolve the breadcrumbs while stirring. I use gluten-free breadcrumbs, I'm gluten intolerant, which may well dissolve more easily than non-gluten ones. I add the chopped egg white before having a final taste to check if any adjustment in seasoning or spices is needed. What I'm looking for is for the cumin flavour to be the star, with the powder fort giving just a little kick of peppery heat behind it. Now it's time for the final dressing of the dish. I pour the sauce all around the chicken. And then add on top, in a rather random manner, my quinces. They are the Councy or quince sauce of the original recipe, Councy most probably deriving from Anglo-Norman French. This delicious medieval dish was really all about creating illusions with food. Who'd have thought? Egg yolks as quinces. But it was also about amplifying the experience of eating. Speaking of which, if you enjoyed this video, you can get access to bonus material via my website, including me reading the recipe from the original medieval text, and a recipe card with historical notes. The details are in the video description below. The sauce